Hey everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Index's Creating Equity and Inclusion Through Culture Change. I have invited an amazing guest on today from Lewes FC on pioneering equity and inclusion. And on your screen, you should just see a few articles that I'll just read. I know most people listening can read, but I do want to read them out because I think they're amazing titles to have. Lewes FC, the football club that pays women the same as men. Lewes FC blaze a pioneering trail for women over equal pay and funding. It's a cultural change, the pioneering football club built on equality. So we'll get into that in a sec. For those that don't know who we are, the Happiness Index, we're an employee engagement and happiness platform. So if you're trying to understand how your people are feeling, which is becoming even more important in the pandemic, then go to thehappinessindex.com and book a demo, and the team will be able to show you how you can collect data on the emotional side of your people. And on to intro. So I'm Matt. I'm co-founder of the Happiness Index. I have a made-up job title of Head of Global Happiness, which is I'm responsible for our global expansion. And I am here with Karen. But Karen, I'm going to bring us back. I'm going to come out of this presentation so we can both see each other. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, Karen.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. Love the Happiness Index. I love the idea of that. I'm Karen Dobres. I'm an elected director at Lewes Football Club. I sit on the board with other elected directors. I think there are now 10 of us. And I lead on our impact on the world. We're jointly responsible for the strategic vision and direction of the club.
So Karen, how did you get into something like this? Like, there's a lot of people who love football, isn't there? That will be listening as well. How did you get into football? So
my journey into football is a slightly unusual one, in that I really didn't like football growing up, or for a long time in my adult life as well. I only got into football because my local football club, Lewes FC, started to make international headlines down the road by becoming the first football club in the world to pay, as you said earlier, women the same as men. And first of all, I didn't know that women seriously played football at that point. And second of all, I wondered why, if they did seriously play football, they usually didn't get paid the same as men. And that was in 2017. So I've had a 5-year crash course on sexism in football now, Matt.
Yeah.
And but I'm a real fan. I like the men's game now too, which is something I never thought I'd say. But I got into it via women's football and Lewes FC women.
And on that point, Karen, you mentioned like the 5-year crash course on sexism in football. Like, when you say that, like, what are the things that are coming out in your head? Like, what can you share with us that you would say you've learned in that 5 years on that?
Wow, it's huge, actually. Well, I learned that, generally speaking, a woman footballer at the top of her game gets paid in maybe a year what a male footballer at the top of his game will get paid. I learned that, generally speaking, women footballers don't get anywhere near the same resources as men footballers, or the same marketing behind them, or are even allowed to use the same pitch as their equivalent men's team plays on. I learned that lots of top female footballers whom I have the privilege of working with, because Lewes FC women play in the second highest tier of English women's football, that they have for a long time basically accepted that as the status quo. And that really great men that I know, some of them now feel a bit ashamed that they didn't point this out and do something about it sooner than we did, even though we are the first club in the world to do this. So no kind of shame on them, really. But now that we've done it, it's like, why didn't we do it sooner, and why isn't everyone doing it? And also, like the FA Cup prize fund, at the point in when we introduced Equality FC, the name of our campaign by which we assigned equal playing budgets to the men's and women's teams, the FA Cup prize fund was £3.6 million for the winning men's team, and just £25,000 for the winning women's team, and now it's, I think, 1.8 million for the winning men's team and £25,000 for the winning women's team, which means that many women's teams can't even afford to play in rounds of the FA Cup because you have to pay for the coaches and the accommodation and to get a match on. So there are huge disparities, and I guess what really drives me, apart from seeing this in football every day, is that it has a massive impact on the wider world and how we see ourselves as men and as women when women don't get equal fame and fortune in the world's most popular sport.
No, thanks for sharing that, Karen. And I'm a Tottenham women's fan. That's my team. One of the things I wanted to just ask you on that same subject, before we even get into the questions that we're supposed to be going through, that I found, if I just put my entrepreneurial hat on as a business owner, I so care about like how we perform, that I just want the best person into the role, right? Now, when I look at clubs, men's clubs, recruitment, and I look at someone like Emma Hayes, the Chelsea manager, I just Googled it beforehand to see her CV. Like, I think she's got like a master's in sociology. I think she speaks Spanish. 11 major honours at Arsenal as assistant manager, and 11 major honours as the Chelsea full manager. Now, there's no female women running men's team, like coaches. And when I put that in a business context, it's hard to comprehend that. Because when you think about like recruiting a CEO or an MD, like to have that in business would just be unacceptable. Do you think, looking at your 5 years, do you think things are changing to that point where it will be standard that you'll have people like Emma being interviewed for the Tottenham men's job, or do you think there's still a long way to go for that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Some really good points made. I think there's still a long way to go until that happens, but I think it will happen, and I think we can see it happening more now than we could a few years ago, even just a year ago, to be honest with you. I think things are changing. I think the thing is, even at Lewes Football Club, we ourselves now have a female head of performance who is over our men's and women's teams, which is quite a breakthrough in a way. She's called Kelly Lindsay. She's an amazing, again, she's probably overqualified. She's an amazing woman who played for the US women's national team, has coached both Moroccan national teams, has coached the Afghan women's national team, and set up a football club in Hong Kong. There are some brilliant people around. It's a shame to appoint them just because of their gender. Emma, I think Emma Hayes is inspirational, and is just a brilliant manager and commentator.
And Karen, but before we get into the actual Lewes questions, right, I could tell from chatting to you before we chatted and from what you said so far, like what you're talking about, you actually care about, right? It's not just a job for you, but it's a why question for you. Why do you care? Why do you care about like what you do, Karen?
Oh my goodness, that's quite a deep question, Matt.
No, we're getting deep, Karen. We're not even into the main.
We dive down pretty quickly. The thing is, there's absolutely no point not being honest and not, being completely open, because why wouldn't I? The thing is, I don't know how long, I want to use my life properly. I don't know how long I've got. This is a great opportunity to make the best of my days, to make a real change in the world. Lewes Football Club has some amazing ambitions. I can see how powerful football is, how much influence it has over hearts and minds, and in particular, actually, men's hearts and minds. And we do live in a society where men have the most power. So those are the hearts and minds I'd really like to help reach and change. And this is a football club is a brilliant opportunity to do that, and one that has the ambition of Lewes FC, which is actually to become the most owned club in the world, because we are socially owned. It's a great chance for me to put any skill I have or any influence I have in there and do what I can to create value in the world. That's what keeps me going. And also, I want to leave the world in a better place than I find it.
Yeah.
So this is for girls that are growing up now. This is for young women. And it's actually also for boys and young men. I want to be a good ancestor, Matt. That's why I do what I do at Lewes Football Club.
Wow, I love it, Karen. We are getting deep. We are. And and the first actual question is a why question as well, which is like, why did the club start on this journey? Like, what made them want to go through this like cultural change journey?
Okay, so that's a really good question, and of course it didn't happen in a vacuum. It was an economic decision originally, because the club was going under. They were 100k in debt with private ownership, and it took a community takeover. Basically, a group of 6 men bought the club for £1, 6 fans, paid off all the debts, and made it a mutual. So it went from private ownership to mutual ownership. And when you go to mutual ownership, you have a different agenda, because you're not trying to make a profit for private shareholders. You're trying to create value for the community that owns the football club. So what we had then, what we still have now, is each person can buy a share in Lewes Football Club and become an owner for £50 a year. And that share gives them a voting right as to who should be on the board. It also means that they can stand to be on the board at an election. And it gives them various insights and decision-making, I suppose, rights at the club. So you elect directors. So the board has a democratic mandate to make decisions. And you are part of our owners app, where we ask, for feedback and questions and give extra content. And we have an owners town hall every few weeks with directors and coaches and players and all our owners from around the world. So we have owners in, I think, 36 countries around the world. And yeah, the club is mutually owned. And so to answer your question, that when it's mutually owned, you create an environment in which your agenda is different, and you're looking to address issues that mean something to society, the people that own you. So you're looking to make it better for them and address and change things through football that you can. So if we're talking about gender equality and the fact that we're the first and only club in the world to value our women equally to the men, that's pretty easy to do in a way, because you just raise the playing budget and make a decision at board level. Don't lower the men's, right? That's important to say, because one of the issues with this is, did the men suffer in any way? No, they didn't. We kept their playing budget equal, and we raised the women's playing budget to match the men's.
That's an important point to pick up there, Karen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that it's about bringing up to both same levels. It's not about reducing one level. I think just wanted to capture that for everyone listening.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because in the end, inclusion and diversity work for everybody. We've certainly found that. So what happened was, by raising the women's playing budget to match that of the men's, we were taking a bit of a punt commercially, because obviously we had to think to ourselves, are we going to get the match day revenues back on the women's side? Because the problem that we believed we would be able to address via marketing the women properly was that we didn't get the same gate figure at women's matches. So in other words, we didn't attract as many people through the women's game as we did at the men's game. So, and that was always the main criticism actually of Equality FC, that people say, well, the women don't deserve to be paid the same as the men, do they? Because they don't get the same crowds.
Yeah.
But then the answer is, well, have you told the crowd about women's football? Have you told the crowd what's good about it and why they might want to come and watch it? I mean, so basically we had the economic push, and we had people with a vision who wanted to change it, wanted to raise the budget and wanted to equalize. And then we had a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And I think the classic example of also that argument being useless as well is the American women's football team, isn't it? Where they have the bigger crowds. and they weren't paid the same amount as the men. So there's a lot of flaws to the counter argument to that as well. When you look at, obviously it's a unique team, but it's, yeah, you've got to look at all the different examples on that.
I mean, it's, yeah, to be fair, at most football clubs where there's a men's and women's team, in fact, let's just, you know, take a punt and say it at all, the men's team will get larger crowds than the women. So there's a point, but it's hardly the social justice argument, is it? And what we've done at Lewes FC is over a couple of seasons, we quadrupled our women's gate figure and actually drew it up to become more in line with the men's gate figure, thus proving concept that when you actually tell people and target people to come to women's matches and put some effort behind your women's stories in the team and get it into the local press, on the radio, and go and, you know, particularly invite people that might come in solidarity to the matches, then you answer the critics with action and you say,
that's such a good point.
Yeah,
that's the equity point, isn't it, around like making sure that it's actually, you're putting the resources into it to achieve other things. Because when you talk about that, the thing that on my own journey that I remember going to Tottenham men in the Champions League, and it was against Ajax. I think it was quarter or semi or something like that, and a brick was thrown at just past me, and it missed me about that much. But I remember walking there thinking, because I can walk to Tottenham from my house. It takes a long time, but I can walk it. I remember thinking just before it happened, I'm going to take my daughter. I'm going to bring my daughter to the next match. And then I thought, and then when that happened, I was like, no way am I going to take my daughter to this. So we went to the women's when they had the Tottenham Arsenal match, which I think is the biggest attendance, and we just loved it. And afterwards, I came out. I just kept thinking, this is the first time I've not had, like, I haven't experienced homophobic abuse. If you're a Tottenham fan, you automatically receive anti-Semitic abuse at every match. And exactly that. It's just, you've got to give people an opportunity to experience it, because as soon as you experience football without that, you start thinking, oh, it doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to have a brick almost thrown at you at a football match.
Oh my God, no. I hate that. I mean, I hate that about football. It doesn't need to be like that. And the thing is that that's where I think the men's game actually, the women's game can hold a mirror up to the men's game as something to aim for. You know, there are a lot of things that the men's game can teach the women's game, but there are also things that the women's game can teach the men's game there.
Yeah.
I mean, about, like you say, like the atmosphere that you create at a match, and you know, you need to set it, you need to set a tone, and you need to have an intention about what you want to create at a match, what kind of atmosphere you want, so that people feel safe and included and welcomed. I don't think I think there's no excuse for that, for what you experience, Matt, to be honest. I really think people can do stuff about that. I mean, you know, it's hard to listen to. We've just put in signs up to say about designated breastfeeding areas at the dripping pan. And we do get people that want to breastfeed, and we have got these areas for them. But I know that one of the reasons I'm really happy those signs are going up is because when you come in and see those signs about where you can breastfeed at a match, it tells you something about what kind of stadium you're coming into.
Yeah, you need to invite some people from the House of Commons to see those signs, because I think there's some debates about that at the moment, which is ridiculous.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's been blocked, breastfeeding in the House of Commons, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, because
absolutely ridiculous.
If you want the best people in the right roles, like feeding a baby, how can that be not right? But the other thing that was actually chucked at me on that point is because I made the point again recently. I put a post up saying it's so nice to go to a football match without homophobia, without racism, and blah blah blah. Is someone in my comments put, yeah, but the same will happen to women's football when the gates go up. And I thought, really? Is that right? What's your view on that, Karen? Do you think if Lewes had 50,000 people there, do you think that you would automatically end up with the same levels of racism, homophobia, sexism, or do you think it's inevitable that would happen in a bigger game?
I think I think there's a point there. I think when you get a bigger crowd, it's much harder to control. And if people are getting swept away by their passion, they might come out with stuff that you can't immediately swoop down on. But I also know that if we ever have a team visiting where we know that the fans are a bit dodgy, and that they've said stuff before that we've found abusive, or that we didn't like, then we brief our stewards and we make sure that everyone's on a watch, not just the stewards, but we directors are fans. We have strong links with our supporters club and with the men's vets and the women's vets that come to the matches, so we can spread word around, look out, call it out, we have big signs up saying you'll be ejected if you use abusive language, and you will be.
Oh well, I didn't realize the coordination behind the scenes to maintain those standards. That's amazing to hear, Karen.
It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be it shouldn't be as difficult as it seems to be for people governing football clubs to get the. I can understand that it is difficult, because you can't predict exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and how it's going to get flamed up, but if you really mean it, you can stop people, and you can get people looking for this stuff, ready to call it out, on guard. We have to be on guard at the moment against these things, because like putting up with it and being a bystander is sometimes almost as bad as being a perpetrator. So we know that we need to be on guard. We're a club that uses football as an engine for social change. We are about making change and activism. So at our football club, at the Dripping Pan, I hope that even if the crowds get big, you wouldn't see that, you wouldn't hear much of that.
No, that's great to hear. And we're only getting on to the second question, which is, how did you get buy-in from the board and the owners? Like you've already sort of outlined, it was the original 6. How does it all work? And was everyone committed to this at first, or was there a lot of work that had to be done?
Well, I mean, so the nature of change is such that you're going to get people that disagree, because if everybody agreed, you wouldn't really be changing anything, right? So the first thing to say is that we have to expect disagreement, and then we have to think, well, what have we got in common, and how can we can keep the conversations going until we all at least get on board with some of the decisions. So
can I just capture that, Karen, because that's advice just for life, isn't it? It's about finding where there's common ground, is there, and then working from there. That's a huge takeaway for all of us, I think, Karen.
I think it's a football takeaway, really, because football is about we over me, and being united, and what it is to support each other and encourage each other and work in a team, right? That's what football is about. It's about collective movement and kind of making decisions together. And really that is about dialogue rather than debate or argument. And dialogue is when you find out what you've got in common. And what we've always got in common at Lewes FC is Lewes FC, right? Is football, and wanting our team to do well, and wanting our club to do well, and wanting to create value for those owners. So, and we have a mission, which is to be exemplary on a global stage, and using football as a vehicle for social change. So great. Once we've got that, it can become depersonalized. We can always refer back to the mission as to why we're doing what we're doing. So great. So the way we did it was that directors stood on the basis that if you vote for me, I will be pushing the gender equality initiative. So use your vote against me if you don't want that to happen. And that's exactly what happened. And enough.
So let me capture that then, Karen. Was that a particular director stood up and said, this is the thing that I want to stand on? Is that correct?
So directors write election addresses. So they write an address that all the owners can read and look at. In fact, this AGM, which was in November, we had a hustings. So that, because on Zoom, because Zoom has been everybody's best friend now, and it's a really great way of communicating with owners around the world, as well as in East Sussex and London, etc. So each of the directors read out their election address, and then questions were invited from all of the owners. So that's how it happens at Lewes.
And can you give us an example of like what another competing thing was that was put up? Like something, is it like another example of what another director was standing on, so we can imagine what people had to consider that was important to them? Because the reason I'm asking, I find it fascinating that there was different views, but the owners really went after this piece. So have you got any other examples of what other people thought was important?
Well, from back in 2017, 2016, 17, I'm not sure that I completely remember. I can give you examples from the recent one, but it's things like, you know, one director might say, I'm really into non-league football. I really want to see us, you know, improve our pitch, and I'm going to work on pitch improvements, and I'm going to make the toilets more accessible, and I have great connections with sponsors, and I'm going to work on the commercial side for the club. And another director might say, oh, I'm really into community engagement and want to work with all these other people in the community that I can bring in to help the club and work together. You know, there are different ways that you might, different skills, talents that people bring to the board, and that they might, as it were, sell themselves on, I suppose.
Yeah, I just find the whole process really fascinating and enlightening about how you're working it all through to people voting for it, and because I just think that means that when they get in place, they've got more chance of succeeding. So I just think you've really tested this is an idea that people buy into.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be quite strategic, because like running a football club turns out to be quite a tough business. I mean, it's really difficult to for people to wash their hands, as it were, financially. So we have to be quite clever on the board, and we have 5 pillars. We have full financial sustainability, we have impact on the world, we have impact on fans and the community, we have our facilities and our house in order, and then we have quality winning football. So there are those 5 pillars that all have to, any one of those pillars fell down and the club wouldn't continue. So you know, we have to really we have to be strategic and directional. But anyway, we were talking about what happened when we introduced Equality FC, and so there were still, you know, 1 or 2 directors who needed convincing on the board, and there were definitely fans who needed convincing, because you know, you really have to, the people that man the barricades, as it were, you have to convince. And sometimes it's with words, and sometimes it's with promises, and then it's with actual actions and results that you have to convince them that this is actually going to work. No one, at the very least, no one will be harmed by this. It can only do good for us. And definitely the buzz that Equality FC created around the club when we first introduced it, and actually ever since, because we've carried on with different campaigns within the gender equality area, has meant that publicity for the club has been massive, and ownerships have risen dramatically, as well as we've got great sponsors on board. So both teams have benefited from the women being valued the same as the men.
Thank you. And so going into, so that's the board bit, but implementing is quite a wide-ranging culture change program. Like, have you got anything you can share on that, Karen? Because there's a lot of our listeners will be HR professionals, and they might be in like, for example, we're going down the B Corp route, which means that you've got to be looking at community and planet as part of your program. But let's say you've a HR person who's listening's got this past the board have signed it off. Have you got any advice on the actual implementing it in the day-to-day?
Okay, so there are lots of, I've written down some challenges here that we had, but I'm not sure if this answers your question. I mean, the challenges we have internally is that, you know, there's nothing wrong. Why would we change? What's the point? It will make no difference. And shouldn't we ask everyone first is another problem, because you can't literally ask everyone first, or we can't afford it. And then the external challenges were, but will it harm our men's team? So you can think of this in relation to other companies, by the way, but will it harm our men's team, i.e. will it harm another product that we've got? Well, how are Manchester United or Chelsea going to do this? So you take a massive company and say, well, how are they going to do the same thing? Or it's just a PR stunt. Twitter was also a problem, because you get loads of people on Twitter who say women's football, ha, 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 you know, just, I don't care. Loads of comments on Twitter. And the fact that change always takes longer than you think, so you have to have a certain amount of investment in it and be willing to sort of manage people's expectations about when it's going to happen. But I think one of the key things that we did in terms of culture change was to expand that market for women's football, Matt. And what we did there, in fact, it was my first volunteer role at the club, was to go and tell what I called unwelcome women about what Lewes FC were doing, because I couldn't bear the fact that people were saying, that women's team doesn't get the same crowds as the men, so they don't deserve to be paid the same. And to my mind, these women were heroes. They were doing things. They were being strong and athletic and working as a team and focused in public, in a public arena, not caring too much about how they looked, but concentrating on the ball. And that to me was like the antidote to a lot of problems that women have in our society at the moment, and girls as well, young women in particular. You know, being told to be decorations and not valuing themselves and not being confident and not being resilient. And these were all brilliant lessons that I knew that if we could get women who didn't think football was for them to come and watch, there would be a lot of value created. And one of the problems, one of the reasons why I didn't like football, and that lots of women right now that even maybe listening to this won't have been to many women's football matches, certainly not live ones, is that we were banned from football for 50 years in this country. So that culturally, girls don't play football very much. They do a bit more now, but they weren't playing much, and they still don't play nearly as much as boys. And when we see football on the telly or we read about it in the press, it's almost exclusively men's football, men's commentators, men players, men's managers, and men talking about it, actually. Not completely, as you've already mentioned, Emma Hayes, and there are others, Alex Scott, and there are others, you know, that are in that arena. But on the whole, we can be forgiven for feeling that football wasn't for us, right? Because I don't know if people on this call know, but I'll just quickly say that the FA banned women from playing football in 1921 when women were getting higher crowds than men to come to their matches, having played it during the war, when they started to play football by playing it in factory backyards when they were making parachutes and munitions, etc., etc. It's a great story, actually. It's a great story. But
I think there's a BBC documentary on it, isn't there? And it's incredible the crowds that were achieved back then.
It is really incredible, but it was very important to the government to re-establish gender norms after the war, for economic reasons and other reasons, I think. Also, the women after the war were collecting for striking miners at their matches and getting a lot of money to enable the strikes to go on longer. So who knows, that might have been another factor. But women's football's always been associated with a small p, with political activations. So when you think about all this, it made me feel very motivated to go and get women and girls to come and watch Lewes FC Women. Lewes FC Women, the only fairly resourced women's football team in the country, in the world, to come and watch them and be inspired. Like I am inspired by them, you know. And so we targeted women's groups, targeted unwelcome women who, when I first went to talk to them, I'd ask, is anyone here into football? No one would put their hand up, maybe one. You know, has anyone been to a football match? Maybe 3 people put their hand up in a room of 40, and those people would have been to a men's match. So, you know, the idea was to tell them about what Lewes were doing, tell them what the problem was, and ask them to come in solidarity with the cause. And once they'd come they'd come back. And the reason they'd come back was because we started to introduce Prosecco on tap, vegan pies, oat milk for your tea, women's football chanting workshops, nail bars. That wasn't a good idea, but you know, different things that we thought would make it welcoming for women, would change the atmosphere and make it like they felt this was somewhere they wanted to be and could feel relevant, you know, could engage with.
And that's why I think the whole toxic masculinity thing is so important to pick up, isn't it, on both sides? Because everything you talked about they're all things I want as well. So it's like that. If someone was talking about this the other day, like how is it become buying flowers? Like they were talking about, like it's women that get flowers bought for them, but only men are missing out on that, because you were trained to think that being bought flowers is not a masculine thing, whereas flowers are just nice. So it's like,
this is the whole point, right? We've got to be free of these ridiculous, restrictive gender stereotypes. Because, you know, boys have to be allowed to cry. They
Yeah,
have
totally.
to be able to express their feelings. The male suicide rate is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, and women have to be allowed to be strong and confident and talk a lot and be bossy, or whatever people say, assertive, really. And we need to break out of these roles because they're too restricted when we're not getting the best from people.
Yeah.
You know, just not moving forward when we've got these restrictions. And women's football is a great way to do that.
Yeah, and I think, and also when I think of people's experience of football, I'd recommend people listening to pick up Soconomics, because it talks about the data linking male teams losing and an increase in domestic violence. I don't have the data in front of me now, but I can imagine that if your only experience of football is that when your partner gets angry because their team has lost, that you're probably not very motivated to go and watch football. So the fact that you've got this guiding light of Lewes is a great opportunity to reconnect people that may have just got rid of football in their mind, when actually it can be all the opposite things to what they think it is.
What you say is so true, and it reminds me to mention, in terms of culture change, how important it is to have support from your community within and without, right? So internally within the club, but also outside of the club. And one thing we've done is set up a sisterships network. So Rise, the domestic abuse charity, and also like Survivors Network, it's the Rape Crisis Centre for Sussex. You know, these are part of our sisterships network. We've got about 15 organisations in it, which includes Sussex Police, that run an amazing He for She programme, and the Girls Network, and Active Sussex, that encourage women to do sports, and just Lewes Women in Business and Lewes Women's rugby team. And we've got some national networks that empower women and girls in some way as well involved there. And they are brilliant, because what that means is that we're reaching out of the normal footballing arena, sports arena, reaching out and getting support from other organisations who are well networked themselves to come to our matches or become owners or just support what we do. And we support them too. So that our male football players were, for example, supporting survivors recently with the Survivors Network's I Believe You campaign, and raised loads of money for them at a recent men's match. And by the way, our men's team are amazing male allies, and a shout out to them, because they really, they use their platforms really well as well.
Do you find, in terms of recruitment of players, and this is another question that we haven't planned for, and we've only got 3 minutes left and 3 more questions to go, but do you find that the people that are attracted to apply and want to come and either play or be part of the team at Lewes, that see the stuff, like on that ally point, do you ever hear from the male players that the reason they came is because of what you're doing across the piece? Does that come up, Karen?
Yeah, it does come up. The male players and the female players are proud to play for a club like Lewes. I'm just going to decline that phone call that we said might happen.
No worries, we'll start it out, Karen.
They're really pleased to play for us. I mean, we have, you know, because we create value for our community, we have a player, for example, a midfielder on the men's side called Bradley Pritchard, who comes in every Friday to grow in our community garden that we set up, which a fan has named Brad's Pit, after Bradley Pritchard. And we're trying to grow our own vegetables there, you know, for example. But I don't think Bradley would want to play for, I don't want to speak for him, but I don't think he'd want to play for another team. If you talk to our captain on the women's side, Rhianne Cleverly, she'll tell you how much she loves playing for Lewes, and because of the work that we do. Our goalkeeper, Tatiana Saunders, got really pissed off with playing for, with working on Wall Street because of the sexism there, and came to be our goalkeeper while doing an MA in business, you know, at Sussex Uni. So yeah, our players are really, they want to play football first and foremost, so we'll be clear about that. But definitely the ethics and principles and values of our club are a big attraction for them.
It's so important, and I can't, as someone who measures happiness and emotions all day, every day, I can't not ask you, Karen, are you sort of measuring this stuff and what you're doing here? Yeah,
well, I mean, we put out, if you look on our website, and please do, we put out a social impact report every year, and we've done it for the last 2 years now, and we're trying to show the kind of impact we create locally and in the world. so that our owners know what kind of value they're getting for the stake that they have in the club. And so they all get that lovely warm feeling of meaning and social purpose, Matt, which I definitely get every day. And also what we really want to do actually is quantify our impact, so that we can put pound signs to it, like how, the fact that we've inspired 2 books in the last year, My Mummy is a Footballer and B, short for Beatrice, on the Ball, 2 books about women that play football. And that goes into schools and shops. And then people start thinking, oh, women play football. And even if they don't want to play it themselves as girls, they know that they can, and that they're part of that part of society. What value do you put on that? How do you quantify it? And that's something that's a piece that we want to work on next.
I love that. And because my final question is around like the impact and the wider community, because again, this is why I love being part of an independent company, because I can just say what I want, which is when I look at, say, a utility like Southern Water, and I look at like what they've been doing in terms of pollution and the stuff they've been releasing into the seas, because I don't care if they're on our pipeline and the CEO hears this and it comes out of our sales pipeline. I don't care, because the way that business has been run for profit is disgusting, because the wider impact of releasing that sewage into clean water, into the seas and stuff like that is horrific. So to hear your initial point around how you've changed and evolved, I'm hoping that other organisations are thinking. I'm hoping people from Southern Water and other organisations are thinking, oh, I can do this. I can change my company or my organisation to be like Lewes. In terms of the wider impact on the world and sport and anything like that, I know you're running out of time, Karen. So if you could just think of one thing that you've seen where it's had a wider impact. You've mentioned the books and schools. Is there anything else that sticks out in your mind?
Oh my goodness, one thing. I love seeing women's jaws drop when I tell them why the status quo is what it is in women's football, i.e. about the ban, because no one ever seems to know. And I like seeing their confidence rise when they either watch a game or see videos of our women playing football. It's just, the way that people can get out of their comfort zone by supporting a women's match, and I've seen them do it, really gives me hope. It gives me hope for the future that people can just be themselves, Matt, and that when they are themselves, they are, to quote yourself, happier for it.
I love that, Karen. I'm just going to bring up our last couple of visual slides, because maybe that's the pit player that you mentioned wants to get involved.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Cool. Here we go. So I just want to share these 2 slides. So if anyone is looking at measuring how their people are feeling, we are doing a really short trial for 3 months. So free for 3 months. Any organisation that wants to get in touch, the deadline's the 18th of February, but you'll get to use the entire platform for free for 3 months, because we've had a neuroscience upgrade and we want as many companies as we can to get on there and keep using it so we can see the data come through. So just go to thehappinessindex.com and sign up for a demo if you're trying to understand how your people are thinking and feeling. We might turn that to 31 if Lewes wants to get involved in that, because that would be fascinating. But I just want to hand this slide back to you, because I just think this is fascinating, and personally I want to know how I can become part of your history. So please tell us about this slide.
Oh, please do, Matt. It's really easy. You just sign up at lewesfc.com/owners. And what this slide is, it's a campaign an ad campaign that we just recently did, which was hashtagged "It's About Bloody Time," and it had various people in our community, including, you can see a player there, saying a reason why it was about bloody time that we changed the way football is run. There are all sorts of different reasons, like for gender equality, for community ownership, because that's Tony there at the bottom in Brad's Pit, because you can come and grow food there for the community. But there are all sorts of reasons, anti-gamification of football. So we believe a principle isn't a principle unless there's money involved, and we've refused. Like you said, we wouldn't have Southern Water as a sponsor, not when we find tampons washed up on the tide line. Thank you very much. So yeah, we're quite picky and choosy. We feel very strongly about this. If you want to join us, help us create change. We would like to become the most owned club, first in the UK and then in the world. We've got some way to go. At the moment, we're at, I think, 2,077 owners. In order to become...
Say that again, how many?
2,077.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's the season ticket holdership of, say, Colchester United. So the fact that you've got them as owners, I mean, that's an amazing start.
Yeah, but we need to get to over 4,000 to become the most owned in the UK, and then over 150,000 to be the most owned in the world, because we need to beat Barcelona, Matt.
So who's the one in the UK on 4,000?
I think it's Wimbledon.
Yeah, who obviously did great stuff as well.
Yeah, we need to get more than that. And the thing is, what we really want to do this, it's not just for the sake of it, it's so that we can have a bigger platform on which to show that when you do these things for the right reasons and you do it collectively, you can really change the face of football. And you can really, and by changing the face of football, you can change a lot in the world because of the impact that football has around the world. 3.6 billion fans, Matt. Imagine if they all became owners of Lewes FC.
I love it. And how much? And let's just think monetarily. How much, if I go on there now, how much do I need to contribute?
£50. It's £50 for an ownership, and by becoming an owner, you get various. You have to activate your ownership, and you get onto our owners app, and there you can get lots of exclusive content. You can get discount from our lovely sponsors, Lyle and Scott. I think it's 25% off all their clothes. You can get discounts on various other shops around locally, and Kappa also offer a discount. We there are all sorts of things that you get access to as an owner of Lewes FC, plus some regular news updates. And
is that £50 per year or £50 all in?
£50 per year. There are also other options. You can I think you can pay by the month. You can pay £100 if you want. You can become what we call a grander, and then that's it for life. But it's an amazing feeling to be part of Lewes Football Club, and I say that from my own heart.
Yeah, well, Karen, I will definitely be going to do that now. That's going to be. I'm not going to leave where I am until I've done that. But Karen, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm going to take that message on allyship, and I'm not just going to think about it. I'm going to try and do something, and I'll message you and tell you what I've done. And I hope that anyone else that's listening, if they do sign up and become an owner or do something on the allyship bit, please message Karen and I, because we would love to hear what you're doing and continue this story. Karen, any last message that you want to share with anyone?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it's been inspiring, because at the moment the world seems a little bit dark, and I do feel that Lewes Football Club sends out little bright beams of light across the world sometimes. No,
I think I can't remember the exact saying, but that's saying, the thing that, if I had to sum up this whole conversation, that's saying something like, people think it's impossible till it's been done. I think that's what you're showing people, and I think that's amazing. So on behalf of myself and Happiness Index, Karen, absolutely been brilliant to learn from you, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much.